Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Westerville City School District Board of Education meeting. Though providing an opportunity for public comment during school board meetings is not a requirement, the Westerville City School District, WCSD, Board of Education, believes it is an important part of its engagement with and accountability to the community. In response to the public gathering restrictions now in place due to the coronavirus, and in the spirit of maintaining an opportunity for our public to participate in these virtual school board meetings, we are offering interested persons an opportunity to submit written public comment. During a typical WCSD Board of Education meeting, there are two opportunities for individuals to address the board. While functioning under this virtual meeting environment, the opportunity to submit public comment will open when the meeting begins at approximately 6 p.m. and close shortly after each public comment section is reached on the agenda. When submitting your comments through the provided forms, we ask you to please keep your comments professional, avoid the use of inappropriate language, and refrain from identifying individuals by name in the event of a complaint. You may use the links to submit written public comments for the board's consideration, submitting a comment regarding a specific agenda item, and/or submitting a comment of a general nature. All comments submitted become a matter of public record and are subject to release under Ohio law and the Federal Freedom of Information Act. As with in-person public comments made during a traditional school board meeting, members reserve the right to respond immediately or withhold comment in order to conduct appropriate research and follow up with the speaker at a later time. Thank you in advance for your understanding and cooperation. And with that, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mr. Bell? Here. Mr. Velarde?
Here. Thank you very much. And if you are able, we invite you to stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 4.01. May I have a motion and a second to temporarily suspend board policy PO 0169.1, public participation at Board of Education meetings. May I have a motion and a second, please?
Second.
Thank you very much. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 5.01. Approve the minutes as presented for the virtual hybrid regular Board of Education meeting held September 28, 2020, and the executive session held October 5, 2020. A motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any discussion, corrections? Hearing none. Please call the roll, Ms. Marshall.
Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 5, board meeting minutes. Agenda item 6, reports 6.01, an equity update from Dr. Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg, you have the floor.
Apparently I'd muted myself and then unmuted, so I'm going to start over again. Thank you, President Velarde, members of the board, for this opportunity to once again provide some update as where we are as a district in regard to working on issues of equity and social justice in our school district. Some of the comments I'm going to give this evening are just an extension of where we started in August, and to give you a sense of the game plan moving forward and the work that's already going on. So with that, Jill, if you'd hit next slide. You know, I really want to go back to this initial slide, because this is really the core piece of and driving force of what we're working at, which is in Westerville City Schools, we believe very strongly in this notion of belonging, and that if we say it, we need to if we say it, we need to be it. And so we want to make sure that all of our students, community members feel a part of our school district. Next slide, Jill. So building on some of what I shared last time, and this is just a quick reminder, the strategic plan that we have in place, it's been in place for several years, does have elements of focusing on diversity and inclusion, multicultural perspectives already built into that strategic plan. So it's not for, a lack of attention to this in the past. We've done work I shared in August, a lot of the work that's gone on in the district around these pieces. Just a reminder again that this is part of the heart and soul of the work we've been doing as parts of our strategic plan. For example, you can see there about instruction that's responsive to diversity and population, including curriculum and materials that includes a multicultural perspective. Next slide, please. And an important piece is the social, emotional development and well-being of all of our students. And so these are key drivers. I'm sorry, I skipped over one also in terms of the diversity of our employee group. So these have been some of the key drivers in our work in the last several years we want to build on, but we also want to do more. Next slide, please. So this is really about taking that bigger step. And as I shared in August, we had a group come together this summer of some of our top-notch employees who worked as part of a racial equity task force and provided us some steps that we can take to move forward as a district. And just as a reminder, next slide, please. They built their work around our equity framework that has been in place for a while. Again, this has just been part of our work in the past, looking at policies and practices, looking at cultural mindsets, looking at how we teach students, making it student-centered, and looking at how we engage our families. We continue to focus on this work. We continue to want to get better at this work. So it is grounded in what we're doing. Next slide, please. As part of the bigger step, we did, through that work this summer, identify 10 key targets. And moving forward, you're going to see these become kind of the cornerstone of the work we're going to be doing as a district moving forward, whether it has to do with culturally responsive education for all of our students, looking at data around academic performance and discipline. Next slide, please. The piece I'm going to really hone in on tonight is that number 3, which is revitalizing and supporting our goal of having district and building equity teams. And as I'm going to share with you tonight, the rollout plan for those equity teams as a infrastructure to get us moving on some of these important topics. Again, academic achievement of all of our student groups. Next slide, please. Looking at discipline disparities, diversity of our staff, professional development. You're going to hear some of that this evening. Get our mindsets around how we do this work. Next slide, please. Looking at instructional practice, looking at the materials we use, the curriculum we're delivering, and looking at better ways to engage our families and our community so that they can be empowered as part of our school district. So these 10 key targets are really, really critical for us moving forward. 2 of them you're going to hear some work on this evening. I'm going to focus on those equity teams. I'm going to focus on the professional development that we've up and running, what we've done so far, and where we're going to go moving forward. And again, these targets will be critical to that work moving forward. Next slide, please. So where are we since August? Really, I would say right now we're at a point of educating and organizing. That is, we're a large, diverse district. We need to be able to have our leadership across the district prepared to engage people in this very important work, and we need to have an organizing structure so we're going about this in an effective manner, and in a manner that is conducive to the long term. Don't want to suffer from the one and done. Don't want to put things in place that aren't aligned to policy, and don't build out things that help us for the long term, so that the work isn't in the moment and then disappear. The work becomes just part of the heart and soul of the district. So that's what we're going for at this time period. So educating and organizing as we go into the school year. Next slide, please. One of the things that were put in place, and at the end of the session, the end of the presentation, I'm going to have Cynthia DeVise talk a little bit more about where we are with the professional development. But these are 5 sessions that have been designed with some external help that we're already starting to deliver. You can see the topics there I've shared with the board. If the board has interest, I can get them access to these because they are available remotely through Schoology, so you can get some experience. What does this look like? And it's really getting about implicit and institutional bias training. So it's about ourselves as individuals and where our bias might be, and then examining the institutions, the organizations, school level, district level, classroom level, and how bias plays into that work. So this piece is up and running. You'll hear some more about that from Ms. DeVise here in just a little bit.
Hey, Dr. Kellogg, let me just jump in real quickly. Is this the one? And pardon if I missed you saying it. Is this the professional development that kind of came out of the work at Ohio State, the organization? I'm sorry, the Kerwin.
Kerwin,
right?
Yes.
Okay. So we've done work with them before. We feel really good about what they bring forward, right?
Oh yes.
Okay.
And so I know Cynthia's on the call. So when I turn to her, I think she can probably provide some more information about that.
Great. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So that was the educating part that we're getting in place. Then is the organizing part, the infrastructure piece, and I apologize that there's so many words on this slide. It breaks the too many words on the slide rule for PowerPoint, but wanted you to see the build out of the district equity team and talk a little bit about its function. So the purpose is written in there. I wanted to embed this somewhat in current board policy. It's a reminder to us that a lot of this work we're talking about is already embedded in policy and administrative guidelines that we have. It's just a matter of paying attention to those and operationalizing those better than we have. And that's what this is going for, is putting a structure in place at the district level and building level to ensure full implementation of the policy that's in place. So I wanted to reference those. They're about access to educational opportunities for all students. It's an important piece. And really the work of the district equity team is twofold. On one hand, we see this serving as a sounding board and advisory board to the district on matters that relate to equity for the district. And I think you'll gather more understanding of that in a few slides when I show the organizational structure and how it plays out. So on one hand, we have pieces of our organization around equity that really function around a district department. So let's take diversity of our staff as an example. That impacts everything from our district human resources department and our reach out to candidates, our identification of candidates, our recruitment of candidates, our retention of employees, as it does down to the building level where interviews happen, or in transportation, or in food service. So in some cases, we have work that is really a big part of the district piece, like hiring, with relationship back to the building piece. So we see the district equity team and the members that are on there as being more advisory, looking and examining at data that we have at the district level and starting to help us prioritize and set the course for that work. And then serving as a sounding board for how we're doing on those strategies and perhaps providing access to community resources. The other part of the district equity team work is to serve as a coordination of two-way communication between what's going on at the district level and what's going to go on with building equity teams that I'm going to point to here in a minute. We want to make sure that there's alignment, there's opportunity for shared resources, opportunity to make sure there's two-way communication across those structures. And I think that you'll see that more in the organizational design I'll share here in a few minutes. So it really has those two functions. So you can think of it one as being part of the advisory piece and help us unpack where we are as a district, and serving as a conduit for aligning all the pieces across the district with our building equity teams. The makeup of this team is rather large, just because we want good representation. And I won't read through all the various components in there. You can see that we're looking for a variety of stakeholders as being part of that team. We've tried to organize the structure with a co-chair model. Currently it stands as a superintendent and Ms. DeVisa's position, coordinator of minority student achievement. By the way, we're looking at a different title for that. We think that this is an outmoded title, so we'll be bringing that forward in the future. And then you can see the various important parts of the district. These are sitting members. There's every opportunity to bring other people in for conversations, and you'll see some more of that in the organizational structure as well. We want a diverse membership as part of that. So that's the current thinking on membership and functioning of the district equity team. Next slide, please. We've seen some of this on the building equity team, and as Cynthia will share with you in a little bit, you're going to see that some of this is already operational. In fact, at our secondary level, it's been these building equity teams have been operating for a while because of some work we've done with the equal opportunity schools. But again, some of the work, and you'll see it built back in that those last couple of bullet points around how they're going to operate and be responsive back to the district equity team is a way of collaboration. And so we're already getting these up and running. I'll show you some timelines. In this case, the building equity teams are more strategic in terms of building strategy, implementing at the building. There's nothing to say that a building equity team may not have subgroups. So they may, depending on what they're working on, they may have other voices that have been brought in to work as part of that subgroup for that building equity team, depending on the strategy. So the goal here is across the district, through the district equity team, the building equity teams, bring a lot more voices in. You'll see parents, students where it's appropriate, community members. Want to bring as many voices in across all of our school buildings as possible and see what we can build on. So that's the building equity team. Next slide, please. And then this is an effort to kind of visualize the organizational structure of this. So as you can see, there's the district equity team and its functions, as I described, as being advisory, reviewing district data, looking at our policies and procedures, helping us establish priorities, working with us on progress monitoring, giving us feedback as we're doing, and also serving as a source of alignment and resource to those building equity teams, which would be developing their action plans, reporting those up into the district equity team so we can look at alignment, see what people are working on. Where I was getting concerned was there's a lot of emphasis in the model initially with district equity team and building equity teams. And over on the left-hand side, you see all those district departments, all of which have relevance to the work. They are hiring people, they're providing professional development, academic affairs manages our curriculum and materials adoption cycle, the resource allocation through the treasurer's office. All of those district departments have roles and responsibilities and policies they put in place that impact the district. So we view them as a resource back to that district equity team. So you may have, I'm going to follow a line of that HR example I was using before, where if we want to start examining strategies for improving the diversity of our teaching staff as a goal, as a legitimate goal. The build out of that strategic action plan, those strategies associated with the action plan, may be a function of the human resource department and a larger breadth of people that would then be reporting back to the district equity team, if that's how we see that organization. So I'm going to, take a quick look at something. Yep, I'm going to stop there for a moment because I want you to absorb the equity team. Notice in each case, those 10 key targets become the focal point of the work. And then the data collection pieces to support that, policies and procedures. So I want to take a minute to stop and say, okay, that's the infrastructure we've put together, the focus. Before I move on, I want to see what questions or clarifications you might have around those components.
Any questions or thoughts at this point?
I just have a quick one. I'll
Sure.
turn my, there, can you hear me now? Just a question about the 10 key targets, because I've looked at them several times, and maybe it's just my deficiency, but 10 is a lot, and they're each sort of long. So in my own head, I was going through and trying to group them, just try to group them sort of thematically. So I'm just wondering, are you looking at them as individual targets, or are you talking about them sort of as, are there some interconnected pieces? Do you know what I mean? Is it 10 different targets, or is it 3 targets with 6 pieces, or however the math works out?
I spent time in that same space looking at 10, and going to make sure I honored the work of the committee from this summer. And this is actually, I think theirs was 13. I see chunks in here that are related to larger parts of operation. There's some overlap. I'll take, for example, the first one, which talks about culturally responsive education for all students. The piece I honed in on that is budget process, funding, and resources. And so how do we account for that in our budgeting process to make sure that through that process, requests for funds that are needed for professional development or for different materials, whatever that is, becomes part of our financial process and not separate from. So there are some places where I think there's in a Venn diagram overlap, but I can, as I've read through them, I can isolate out specific pieces. There is a curriculum and materials piece. There's a pedagogy piece. There's a professional development piece. There's a human resource piece. There's an equity team, the infrastructure piece. So I think there is some overlap between some of them, but I do see enough separation within those.
Thank you.
I have a question. So as I'm looking at the organizational structure, so I get the equity, the district equity team and the building equity team. So how will we handle the training for the district departments and for operations that don't fall under a building equity team?
Yes, I think that's a great question. So in each of those district departments, there are people in key leadership positions, whether or not it's an executive director or director, that as we examine professional development like we are doing with our instructional staff right now, we can start to look at that and say, where do we plug this in for these other players in our organization, from food service to transportation? But we need to work with those leaders because those employee groups are much different than teachers in terms of scheduling and availability and what their needs for professional development are. So I see that if you consider that one of the 10 key targets is professional development for all, then one of the spots this district equity team may want to look at early on is what are we doing to ensure that our non-instructional employee groups are getting the right kind of professional development to move things forward as we move on too. So that's where that interplay comes. So who plans out the professional development might be a team of key leaders from that particular department. Well, I'll just say food service for lack of an example. And so that may be built upon work from Mr. Visa's office, work from our curriculum department that has access to some of that training, and work from our human resources department in terms of how we distribute that, and then work from key leaders from that department to say, you know, the way our schedule works and the way we do PD, this is going to be the best means of delivering that. So that's how I see that coming together so we can assure that. So that's one of those spots that we need to move as we look at priorities moving forward. For me, the professional development piece has to come front end before some of this other stuff can come. It needs to be very much in the front end, not in lieu of anything else, but certainly as part of initial steps. So that's how I'd envision that happening. Does that make sense?
It does. And kind of the reason that comes to the forefront of my mind are in a couple of those departments, our public will have an interaction with that personnel before they will with anyone else. So before I even get to the teacher, my child has already been on the bus and gotten off the bus. So I need to make sure that that bus driver then is aware of their implicit bias and what they may be. Before I can get to the teacher, I have to go into the office. So we need to make sure that the frontline staff are receiving this kind of training as well. So I just wanted to, as I was thinking about that, make sure that that part of it doesn't get lost in the shuffle as we focus a lot of our attention on instructional staff.
And that is why as we built this, we put it that way with that those district departments connected back to that district equity team, because we don't want to miss that group. So much of what's in those 10 key targets, discipline, because there's a lot of bus discipline, right, and disparity in there. The PD that we're talking about, the family engagement piece, those are all big chunks that our non-instructional staff are dealing with. Pedagogy, materials, content, right? But the rest of it, you're absolutely right, and that's how we envision this moving forward.
I think that's a great point, Vaughn. And the thing I was going to bring out, and Dr. Nestor Baker, I know you wanted to say something. It seems to me that what we're trying to do is throughout the organization, top to bottom, don't like to use that phrase, left to right, that we are trying to help people understand where their biases are, where their struggles are, because students, community members will interact with different parts of the organization, and which is why I want to give a shout out to Dr. Kellogg, something you said early on in this, that this board needs to be run through some of this. Run through, that's not the best. We need to be trained in these modules as well. There's nobody that's seated up here that doesn't have implicit bias that needs to be addressed. And so I like the fact that the arrow is pointing both ways, that all of the organization needs to be trained and corrected and encouraged and held accountable.
And as a reminder, if you recall, in the district equity team, there's at least one board member sitting on that I think creates that opportunity to think about what would be good for the board in terms of their understanding and appreciation. So,
thank you. Yes, Nancy.
So I have a couple of questions. And first of all, I want to underscore what Vaughn was talking about, what Rick was talking about. I would actually go a little further and urge you to include on the district equity team classified administrators, at least one or two classified administrators. While it is one thing to have the data and the information coming from them, it's another thing altogether to have them actually engaged with the committee as the committee does its work. So I would urge you to think about that. And in that same urging, I would suggest that I noticed that the Director for Special Ed is on the district, or suggested for the district team. That's great. That person should be there. I would suggest that as we look at the equity teams at both the district and the building levels, that we make sure that we have representation from all of our special population groups so that we ensure a better coverage, if you will, of our equity work. And it goes back to very much what Rick and Vaughn were talking about. But after that, I've got a couple of questions I'm hoping you can clarify for me. As I read through this, and as Jen, I have read through it a lot and given it a fair amount of thought. I am not clear whether the equity teams, as we're developing them, are focusing on the overall equity framework that we have, or whether these equity teams are focusing only on the racial component of that equity work. And it would help me to understand what we mean at this point in time.
So I would say that the spark to push us from the summer was certainly around racial equity, racial justice. I would say that the team that met this summer had a strong focus on that piece. The information, the presentation, or the way the 10 key targets are written certainly highlights racial injustice pieces and a focus there. But it also includes all student populations, because we need to make sure that we're bringing everyone along. It goes back to everyone belonging. And so the focus of this is on all student populations is where we need to be. However we slice the data, however we look at the data, however we look at student performance or our own bias, wherever that is, it becomes a barrier to somebody's success. Whatever my bias is, whether it has to do with race, religion, differences in economics, whatever that is, gender, whatever it is, that becomes a potential barrier to someone's success. And so we need to identify all of that. So I think we're in a all student mode.
Thank you. That does help. And I do understand where the group this summer was working from and working toward. But I think it's very, important as we go forward, as we, in some ways go, if you want to say back to the future, because we have had the equity teams on the books, so to speak. But as we build that out, I want to make sure that we retain all of the components of our equity framework as we move forward. And I understand that there are times where we need to focus more intensively in one area than another, but I don't want us to lose the overall framework. With that in mind, in Target 4, Asian students, Indigenous people are not mentioned. We have identified certain groups who are perceived to be people of color or races that we need to focus on. And I would ask that we think about how we look at Asian students and Indigenous people as well. I understand those aren't large populations in our school district, but you don't have to be a large population to feel inequity. So I just want to make sure that we include as much as we can as we focus, because as Reverend Velardo said, we all have biases, and sometimes those biases are in and toward areas that we don't realize, and it's important that we think about that. So that's another urging, if you will, to think about broadening our expectation of students within groups. Let's see here. What else did I have on my list? And I'm not sure this may be something Cynthia would be addressing in her discussion. Is our equity-focused professional development, are we focusing only on race at this time? And if so, are we planning to move into other arenas in coming years? I'll let Cynthia respond to that in a little bit, but I think you're probably going to see some of the initial work we're doing heavy to race, and additional work going to need to be done in some other spaces. Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. It was clarification that helps me understand where the work is going and how we're going to live up to what we say we are seeking to live up to.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't have any questions, but I am interested in the training. So if we could just put that down.
I think we created a link in Schoology for all the board members, so I'll make sure that we get that to you guys so you can see.
Yep, we do. We have a link to that.
Great.
Yep, thank you.
So I'm going to move past that piece and go to the next slide, please. One of the areas I think we're going to need to consider moving forward, and this is, it's October, is looking at what our investments in addressing some of this is going to be. And it's my belief that as we start doing this work, we're going to start to discover where we might need to apply resources. For example, it may require some revisions to curriculum that we're going to need to bring in some of our teacher professionals to work on. It may mean looking at some of the materials. It may need new programming for family engagement. May need some human resource development to support these equity teams, or additional student programs similar to what has been funded before through the Ed Foundation. So rather than put a number in front of us to say this is the amount, my preference is that as we start this work, start this journey as a district, we keep this in mind and work to make sure that as we go through our budgeting process going into the, once we start that here in the near future, believe it or not, that becomes part of our consideration. We need to make sure that we're uncovering what we need through this process and then considering resource allocation in the context of all the resource allocation that we need to do, not as a separate one-off away from everything else. Because unfortunately, when the resources need to cover a lot of different priorities, we need to go through that prioritization of the work we're doing. This work's very important to us. I think some of what we're going to need to do is going to rise to the top in that budgeting process and have to fit in. But I think we need to go through that collectively as an organization to discover that. In the near future, as things stare in front of us, we have budget sets. We're able to support things going on now. We'll have to continue that process as we move forward. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question before we move on?
Sure can.
So as part of the human resources investments for consideration are additional staff for this area considered under that broad umbrella?
Yes. So some of the recommendations that have been discussed before is expanding staffing at the district level to support the work from our office here. Ms. DeVise's work has been initially very focused on secondary, and I know elementary is hungry for similar kind of support and leadership. So we're examining that piece. And at the building levels, as these equity teams get up and running, I'm always sensitive to the workload on our building principals and how many things they need to manage, and understanding that across the district, there are a lot of teaching staff who have a passion for this work, that the opportunity to support that and lead that in conjunction with the principals is a great thing to capitalize on. So we may want to look at that piece as well. Whether that through some kind of supplemental contract or stipend, we might want to look at that work as well.
Okay, because one of the things that as I look at the structure and look at, okay, what the future of that might look like, is that I foresee us with a district our size, and we are continuing to grow. We will need a department of equity, whatever that winds up being called, because one staff person is just not going to be able to do what needs to be done in this area. With 23 buildings, in a few years will be 25 buildings. One person just cannot do that work. So I would just wanted to make sure that as we're talking about human resources, that we keep an eye on, yes, if we're going to remain true to this work, there are financial resources that are going to have to be dedicated to it.
So we'll be doing as we always do, working on our long-range staffing plan and what that might mean in terms of the district. Supplemental contracts that we use with teachers that we have go through a process that's part of our contract with the Teachers Association. So we'll start to look at those and the financial implications so that the board consider those within the financial structure that we have, the 5-year forecast and staffing, et cetera. So we want to fit those in. I think it's also important to point out, I agree, Reverend Bell, with the belief that we're going to need to build this. And I think some of it is understanding that this work has to be embraced by all. And I've said it to my administrative team. If this isn't part of the heart and soul of who you are as an administrator and understanding who we are as a school district, this may not be the right place for you. If this is not work that you're going to embrace and build your own capacity to understand and to deliver on, if you're going to view it as compliance, then you're probably not in the right space as a leader in our district, because this is who we are. This is our diversity, and so we need to have leaders that aren't going to look across the table for someone else to be the sole source of that leadership. And if they're uncomfortable with their own understanding, which we all are, and their own professional development, then they've got to own the responsibility for that. Not just participate in trainings that we provide, but there's more you can do as an individual. And so I'll continue to preach that with the team as well, because we need this leadership distributed across a lot of, not just administrators, across a variety of places. So we want to grow that collectively, hire that collectively, and honor that collectively, and give people the opportunity to lead it for us, which I think is some of what we're talking about. So we'll be putting that in place. Other questions on that one?
Well, I'd also like to keep before us, as we move forward with opening the 2 new buildings on the southern end of the district, that we keep equity at the forefront of our minds as we think about that as well, in terms of staffing those buildings, and the kinds of persons that we wind up bringing on board to provide leadership in those buildings, even in terms of the resources that may need to be allocated to those buildings. Well, I would contend will look different than the resources that get allocated to some other buildings in our district. And so just that we be mindful of the difference between equity and equality.
I agree. And that will need to be part of, as we examine these buildings and get the boundaries going, which starts again tomorrow night. We'll need to continue looking at that. Okay, to go to next steps. So how do we get this thing rolling? What's kind of a timeline for expectations? Want to share with the board tonight, get their feedback, take some of that into consideration. Wednesdays are all administrator meeting. I'll be presenting the same thing to all of our administrators. What's the plan? What's the expectations? What are their deliverables? Within that, there's an expectation within that time frame that we get our building, many of which are already set, and our district equity team, which is right now at a roster of 0. So that's where the biggest work is going to be, is putting our district equity team together, getting those rosters established, getting initial meetings done. Probably less so at the building level. I'm sure most of them have already had their initial meetings. But at the district level, getting that district and equity team up and going. And reminding ourselves that the first part of that work for a team is getting to know each other as a team. And getting to know each other, building trust, establishing our norms and protocols, understanding what the work is as the upfront piece before we try and dive in and tackle some of the tougher issues. The other part of that timeline, and you'll see, is the February of 21, would be the expectation that by February of 21, those teams will have established at least the beginnings of their action plans. And I'm viewing this as you see February of 21 through May of 22. That's purposeful. Want to get the teams up and running, prepared, organized, and let them have time to really take a look at the data, take a look at their priorities, start to establish those action plans, start to put the strategy in place, and carry that through the end of the following May. as opposed to a short term, let's go from February to May. It's just a difficult time to get anything done. So we want to get it up and running and continue that work into the May of 22 rather than a short-sightedness. And really from May of 22 onward, but getting that piece in place. I think this is a reasonable timeline. I vetted this with some of our building administrators to see what they felt about it. They felt that this was manageable and doable. And many of them are already kind of off and running. So that's the timeline of the work we put together. Any questions on that piece?
Questions at this point? Hearing none.
So what I thought I'd close with is let Cynthia DeVries take a few minutes to talk about what she's already seeing and experienced with some of our equity teams and what we're seeing and experiencing with some of the professional development that's always already going on and how that's cascading through. So Cynthia, would you care to share with the board some of what you see going on?
Sure, Dr. Kellogg, thanks a lot. I'd like to say good evening to everyone, to the board, President Velardo. So we really thank you for the opportunity to share our equity work. So as Dr. Kellogg was saying, every building has is in the process of creating their building equity team. So that's where we are right now. Everyone has the guidelines as to who are the stakeholders who should be participating on those equity teams, which would include their building staff, students, and also family members or parents in the community members. So they already have their understanding of who needs to be involved on those equity teams. What is actually leading and guiding our work? All the work that the building equity teams will be charged with is centered around the equity framework. So the work that you would see us doing within the modules in our trainings is just a piece of that work that is included in the equity framework. I know I heard Dr. Nancy Nestor Baker wonder if everything is hinged on this particular training for implicit institutional bias. Well, that's just a piece of the equity work that falls in line on that equity framework. So we're really looking at all four pieces of the equity framework, which would be the cultural mindset, the student-centered teaching and learning, the family and community engagement, and then our equity policies and practices. So our building equity teams will work all the way around because what they're doing is really focusing on our students because that's the nucleus of what the work is, right? All of our students, but we need to make sure that we're addressing all of those pillars or areas within the equity framework. So each of our buildings are building their equity teams or creating the equity teams. And in regards to our secondary teams, they have already created their teams, right? We have had some discussion about, you need to make sure you have X, Y, and Z on the team. You need to make sure you have parents, community members on the team. And so we're really looking at those things very closely to make sure that they're engaging everyone in the work, right? So our building teams are set. And then what we're doing now is they're in the process of training on the one particular module through the Be the Change, implicit and institutional bias. So they're on session 1. And I believe that everyone on the board has access to that particular session. Now, what we have decided to do is we have trained people from our buildings how to be facilitators. Those individuals are going through and training our equity teams. So each of our secondary teams, we have 2 buildings left, one middle school, one high school, who still needs to train their equity team. But we are either doing them in person or we're doing them virtually. And they have really been very impactful. It's really been a great experience to be able to engage in those conversations around race, around equity, around our students and our teachers. And just with those small groups, it's just really been impactful. So we would love to have them in person. we're not able to do that, but the virtual aspect works as well. Okay, so we, like I said, for secondary, we have already trained the majority of our building equity team members. In regards to elementary, in working with Barbara and the elementary team, what she wanted to do was really focus on where we are as leaders. And so she wanted to take the elementary principals and really focus on the work around the equity framework. Now, several years ago, probably about 3 to 4 years ago, we worked with the Kerwin Institute, Dr. Miranda, and they began to train in regards to the equity framework. And they trained in each one of those content areas, right? So what Barbara wanted to do for her elementary principals was she wanted to make sure that they really understood and focused and honed in on those concepts of the equity framework. So we have already done the first workshop with them was last month on the cultural mindset. And then this month, actually tomorrow, they'll begin to do the second process, which is student-centered teaching and learning. Okay, so I work with Barbara and her team, and then we work together so that they're able to lead that. And then I don't have to lead it. It's really about them engaging with her principals and her coaches and her team members. And so it's really working out well. So work around equity is happening throughout our buildings, and they're leading the work. And so that really feels good, and we're really getting a lot of payoff. So everyone is being engaged. And so I think I wanted to answer a couple questions that I heard Dr. Nancy Nestor Baker had asked about. Are we also thinking about our Asian students, our Indigenous students, our Latinx students? Those, even though that was written in our 10 key points, because I think when we did those recommendations, it was definitely in the summer and we were responding to what was happening in our world. But when we're in those meetings and in those conversations with the training, we're talking about all of our students. And as a matter of fact, in some of our student vignettes, which are recordings of our actual student voices, the concepts and the situations that are being elevated through some of the student vignettes talk about students of all ethnic groups, right? Some of our Asian students, some of our Native American students. So all of those concerns that students may have are being addressed within those modules. Within that Be the Change, implicit and institutional bias workshop sessions that we're having. And so we're able to have those conversations. We're able to have those conversations about our English learners, our special ed, and our students who are in need. So we're talking about all those things when we're sitting down in those discussions within the training. So I did want to address that. So that is a part of it, the equity framework, and then within the modules, those have been going really well. So I'm just really impressed. It's a lot of work that we're doing right now, but I think the conversations that we're having around equity and inclusion have been very beneficial and very healthy conversations.
Thanks, Cynthia. And, I know you have led us skillfully along this way and put a lot of work in this, and I appreciate that. So thanks for doing that and for sharing with the board. I'll open up to any questions the board might have.
Any questions for Dr. Kellogg or Ms. DeVries?
Not a question, just wanted to say thank you. Thank you, Cynthia DeVries, for answering some of the questions that I raised. I appreciate that. And thank you, John, for putting up with all of my many questions as well.
Thank you very much. Reverend Bell, you said you had some?
Yes, I have a few. How will people find out who the members of a building equity team are and what they're working on? How will we let people know that this work is taking place?
So built into the building work will be part of their planning is how are we going to inform our school committee what we're working on, similar to like you would with any action plan. So there'll be an expectation of sharing that out. If I was a building principal, certainly that would be a piece of communication to families. It'd probably be a piece of any PTA meeting I'm at to share a little bit about what we're doing, and working with my PTA to help identify parents to serve on the committee would be ways I would start that. And I'll get more information from them on Wednesday. I want to hear from them what they are doing. I want to hear what they are doing around that. But I think emphasizing the work, spotlighting it at the building level and at the district level is going to be important early on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our equity teams have been in place for a while. Have we looked at why they stalled?
I wouldn't say they stalled. At the secondary level, their origin was really connected back to the equal opportunity schools, which was very focused on minority student enrollment in our AP and IB courses. It was a very specific targeted initiative, national initiative that the schools were doing. And so some of this work came from there. And so the high schools in particular organized around that. So their data on advanced placement work was disaggregated to look at the student body makeup of those courses relative to our total student body makeup and what the gaps were, and then targets were set. Data was used to identify minority students who were not participating in AP. There was a whole lot underneath that was built out in an effort to bring forward that initiative. And we've had great success with that. We've talked about that here before, about that enrollment. So their focus has been very singular to that. But it's also a great example of how our teams at the high school, and let me back up, that then filtered down to middle school and some of the policy changes we made in terms of access to high-end curriculum at middle school and how we opened the door there, because we knew that that's part of the portal, right? Students who weren't engaged in honors level work in middle school were less likely to enroll in AP work in high school. So if there were barriers in there to that work that were from policy, we need to remove those, and we did. So that pipeline's in place to build out. So I think the experience we've had through that, particularly at the secondary level, has demonstrated to us what we can do when we pay attention to data, are purposeful and intentional. We've found tremendous talent in our student body that we were missing because of our own biases and policies and practices. And our teachers rose to the occasion in those instances. And our performance, not only did we expand the number of students accessing, expand the diversity of the students accessing, we did so without any slippage in really our performance. So we created a lot of opportunity for kids who are piling up AP credits that weren't accessing before and creating their own self-confidence about themselves as a student that was being enhanced through that. So I wouldn't say it was not rigorous. I would say it was narrowly focused, and now we want to expand that focus and build on that experience.
Okay. And one last one, softball. What kind of progress are we seeing? You alluded to some of it with the expansion down into middle school and the number of students that are participating in AP, IB courses, College Credit Plus courses becoming more diverse, and there's been no drop off in performance in those areas. Are there other kinds of successes that we are already having that maybe we haven't seen because we haven't been looking for it?
I think the coursework piece is probably our most pronounced in important work because it goes back to educational access. So go all the way back to the policy that's at the front end of all this that talks about really equal access to all educational opportunities in the district, and dismantling policies and practices and mindsets that don't really allow for that. And so some students weren't accessing. So great example, I mentioned some of the tools in the equal opportunity schools. There was a student survey piece, and Scott Reeves, if I get this wrong, feel free to correct me, and if you want to share on some of this conversation, feel free. But one of the questions for some of our students, our minority students, was why they weren't accessing AP coursework, advanced placement coursework. And the sad answer was, part of it was they were saying they didn't know they were allowed. That's just an adult problem. That's not a student problem. Being invitational and being in ourselves as adults, finding new ways to identify that talent and give that talent the opportunity and support that talent. So I think we've had an experience base that's been important to us and has some longevity to it that is a great lean on as we look at some of these other issues moving forward. And I would say, it's not just accessing that coursework. It's how those students view themselves as students. Where do they go to from there? What are the opportunities 5, 6, 7 years down the line that's enhanced because of that positive experience? And for some of them, it's not. For a lot of students, it's not easy. But not easy builds character, right? So, and our supports of those students from boot camps that we've done in the summer for first-time AP course takers, how our school counselors have aligned around that in the buildings. So we learned a lot from just that simple piece that we can replicate and put in other places. And Scott, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the data or anything else in that area, if you're on. Didn't mean to put you on the spot without telling you I was going to do that, but I thought you might have something to add.
No, I think you nailed it. We do extensive surveys with our students at the beginning of every year, and Dr. Kellogg shared some of the barriers that we were trying to overcome, the feeling of being welcome, the feeling of not being the only minority student in the classroom. And the buildings at all three buildings, and the teachers there and the administrators there have done an amazing job of reaching out to students, making them believe. As Dr. Kellogg alluded to, we began to build that foundation at the middle school level, and we've seen more and more students take advantage of the rigorous coursework. And I don't have any data in front of me, so I don't want to speculate on any specific numbers, but we've had a significant, increase of all of our students, including our poor and underrepresented students, so much so that we started one year and had to buy more books because we didn't have enough books. We've added AP courses that have been wildly, and IB, wildly attractive to our students. And so it's been very successful, and that is a foundation of our equity work right there.
Cynthia, I think you might have something to add.
Yeah, if I can add, I wanted to say a part of that work that we can definitely model at all of our schools is we created trusted adults, and those trusted adults had access to a small group of students who they can encourage and motivate. And students were, through that survey that Dr. Kellogg mentioned, came an insight card, a student insight card that talked about what their expectations were, what their goals were for the future. And then that card was given to the trusted adult who that student recommended, that said, hey, I feel as though teacher X, Y, and Z cares about me or sees me. And then that was connected with the student insight card. We gave that information to that teacher, and that teacher began to have one-on-one conversations with that students to encourage them to either be college and career ready, or what kind of conversations do we need to have to encourage and motivate those students. And I think that also, coupled with everything else, is a recipe for success for our students. So I just wanted to kind of add that along with some of the things that we've seen. And that also goes with that sense of belonging, and that panorama data that we get is, how do we make our students know that they belong here? How do we make sure that our students know that they are seen, make sure that they understand that they're valued? And that happens when we're able to get teachers to be those trusted adults, because what we realized through the panorama survey is that some students say they do not have a trusted adult, and then outside of school or in school. And so we need to make sure that we compensate for that. And I think we did that throughout our district with our mentoring programs that we had in our middle schools, and our Boys and Girls Summits that we had in our middle schools that kind of branched off to something else. So we've been doing the work. And maybe we need to be a little bit more transparent about what we're doing, because there have been some great things that we've been working on with our students, to the point where I'm getting emails now from students saying, hey, when are we going to do those mentoring programs? Ms. Davidson, she's one of our mentors, so they've been asking about us and wanting us to kind of get those things going, because our students do know that they are seen and they are valued, and so we want to make sure that they're supported. So that's it.
I really appreciate you bringing that out. Cynthia, if you could stay on for a second. The real quick story is that this past summer I met with about a dozen students over the summer, talking about racial biases, equity issues, so on. I just met with a couple of students at a time, and it's about a dozen, I guess, all told. And one young man, African-American man, told me, and I would love to go back to him now and ask him, was this an official trusted adult that told you this? He did well through middle school, but no one ever asked him to take a higher level course. He got into high school, ninth grade, was doing really well. A teacher approached him in the beginning of the year and said, I think you ought to be taking this AP course over here. And this young man looked at me and he said, I turned to him and I said, what's AP? What does that mean? He had never been told about that option. Now, this young man just graduated this last year and did nothing but AP once he got finished with high school, and is on to a great college right now, and so on. So I just, I think that you are right that you have been doing, many of our people have been doing this work and trying to encourage students. But I think Vaughn is right. We need to share the story with the community. Not that we're doing enough, not that we want to stop, but that this is not a new thing that we're trying to do, and it's an expanded thing that we're trying to do. My question really is, and it's if it's okay, Cynthia, it's really more of a heart question. Tell us how you're feeling about this new emphasis initiative. Tell us about the people in the schools. What's kind of feedback are you getting from the adults that we are charging to move and broaden this whole effort? How are you feeling about this? How are they feeling about this?
Well, I will say this. I was really moved a couple of days ago, because in all of the trainings, I'm trying to stop into the training to see what's going on, because I really take it personal. So I want it to be done right, or, what I think is right. So I stopped in there, and it's virtual, but I had teachers, they were in tears. They were moved to tears, because they really want to make sure that students are valued, and that they just felt the pain. They just didn't know what to do. And the best thing that they could say was, we just want to be, we want to be that safe place for our students. We want them to know that we are here for them. And what is it that we need to do for them to understand that? So, and they're just really acknowledging that, they're acknowledging where they are, and that they have space to learn, and that they want to learn, and that they want to be there to support their students. And so they were just really open to the training. There's not one session that I have been in where people are asking for more information. They want to read books. I'm sharing articles. So it's a place of wanting to know and wanting to gain more knowledge. And I think people are pleasantly surprised with the training that we're providing them. I think they're pleasantly surprised. I mean, they enjoy it. They thoroughly enjoy it. And they're just grateful. I get a lot of thank yous. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And when people feel like they're lacking, then they want to know how they can build up their knowledge base. How can they shift their mindset? How can they grow? How can they learn more? And so people are really open and they're resonating. And I think that just because of the climate and what everyone has experienced, then they are much more aware. And I had one teacher who, her comment was, because of our virtual space and how we have been virtually, she mentioned that she had been calling the student the wrong name. And it was a Latino student, and she had been calling her the wrong name, but the student never told her until we got back into school, and the student walked up to her and said, "You've been saying my name wrong. That's not my name. This is my name." And she said she just felt like, oh my gosh. But she realized that the student felt had gotten to know her, and she came to her since it was in person, and then she felt more comfortable telling her that this is how you pronounce my name. And that teacher was like, oh my gosh, I could have just, she said it just really, it was just so impactful, and it made me realize that the name of the student is so important. That name of the student was so important, and that she just felt so humbled that the student was able to come to her, and that school came back. She was like, I've been calling her a whole different name the whole time. We were virtually, but once we got in person, that student was really able to feel that I was there for her, and she came to me to say, yes, this is how you pronounce my name. And she said, and I haven't gotten it wrong. And that was a lesson that will last me forever as an educator, that name of that student was so valuable to her. And it was important, and so it was important to her to do that and to share it with the group. So I think that people are really wanting this time and wanting this experience, and it's proving to be beneficial for our district.
I think that's wonderful, and you just reminded me that we often say we want our students to be lifelong learners. Well, what you just described was there's a whole bunch of educators that know what they don't know, and they want to learn. They want to be lifelong learners. And what more could we ask? Thanks, Cynthia. Who else? Question? Yeah.
I don't have a question. I just want to follow up on the discussion that just occurred. I really want to give a huge shout out to John Kellogg and to Scott Reeves and to Jen Knapp and to Cynthia DeVisa as well. The work that has gone on with opening up our advanced courses at the middle school has been difficult to do. It does get in the way of people's mindsets, and pushing ahead with that work, we are seeing good results from that. It's what our kids need. It's a way to provide access. The lead hire schools, the equal opportunity schools, we've been doing this work now for several years, and you heard what the results are. This is huge work, and no, it's never enough, but for us to have pushed against the tide and done that work and now have significant data to show for that work, I think deserves kudos all around for those who brought that forward and have been making that happen. So, a lot of it is about access. But access is only part of the piece. And the comments that Cynthia was just making there, it takes relationships, it takes that connectedness, it takes a focus on retention and success to go with the access piece. And when we can create that for our student population, especially for our students who've been underrepresented in the advanced coursework in this district, then we have taken a big step forward, and it's a step that many other people can then take as well. So kudos to all who have been involved for the last several years in bringing that work forward. It isn't easy to do, so thank you.
Can I pop in for 1 second? Yeah, thank you. So I just have to echo the appreciation for this work. There's nothing else matters if every child doesn't feel like they're valued when they show up every day. And it's easy to say that over and over again, but I really think that's true, and I appreciate all of the work and attention that's going to equity issues right now, and hope that will continue forever, and hopefully we'll get to equity, whatever that looks like, but someday. Just a couple of quick follow-up questions. One is about words and terminology, and so I'm thinking that as this evolves, the district equity team might be able to help make sure that the words that get used are sort of uniform across the district. So we talk about, you raised the issue about with the term minority, right? And that's a term that we want to revisit. So I guess I would just put that out there, that I know you all know this, but the words matter, and just to make sure there's some uniformity in how that's being used across the district, different terms. I would appreciate that. And then just a question, and this may not be answerable right now, but I'm wondering how the various equity teams will assess whether they're being effective. Right? Will they be setting their own qualitative and quantitative goals based on a particular goal for the year, or just what do we know so far about, I guess, building equity teams, district equity teams? How we'll know whether they're being effective? Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, so those action plans will have an expectation of SMART goals as part of those, quantifiable. One of the areas that I find really critical in these action plans, particularly in school systems, is we sometimes skip right over adult implementation measures and go right to student performance measures. And you don't change student performance measures without changing adult behaviors. And so I'll be looking for that. And the two-way communication of those equity teams, it was great. We had this great discussion. I think it was Dr. Carter, one of our new assistant principals at South, who has done work in this field and is very passionate about it, talked about that piece about can we use the district equity teams as a means of, I don't want to say quality control, but as a feedback mechanism with some expertise to the building equity teams. I don't want it to be an oversight or compliance or accountability. I want it to be a partnership and expertise. And so we may see situations where building equity teams are presenting their action plans to the district equity team to look for those pieces, to make sure those pieces are in place. So that will be part of the expectation and the roadmaps coming forth.
Can I answer Jennifer also? Jennifer, two things. One, you asked about...
If I could just piggyback on that real quick. I would also hope that we would see that kind of collaboration between the two, also as a mechanism for sharing best practices and best the best way to go about this work and what works well.
Absolutely. I can see as buildings are examining best practices as strategies for implementation, as we see results around those pieces, we then have the capacity to look at putting that across multiple buildings, whether that's a district initiative or it's a particular building that finds a best practice that works, and as being a repository, some expertise from that district equity team to provide that. And we have some of that built in. Obviously, we actually have a wealth of talent across our district amongst administrators in this space. So I think we'll have a great opportunity for that piece.
Yeah.
Cynthia, did you have something to say? Cynthia DeVries?
Yes, I was just responding to Jennifer's question about terms. And just to clarify, we do have a glossary of terms that go along with the training that we're rolling out. And in addition to the glossary of terms, so we can create a common language for our school district, we are, for November 3rd, which is our professional development day for all of our educators, one of the colleagues who helped to create the glossary of terms with Ohio State University, she's going to come to our professional development day and have a session on words and understanding terms and words for equity, right? So we are going to have a person who's going to talk about that during our professional development. So we have a list of terms, and then we also have someone who's going to talk about the meaning of words. So everybody will have access to that. And then the second thing you asked about was kind of follow-up and assessments in regards to holding people accountable and results. One of the things that Ohio State University, College of Education, and the Kirwan Institute has built in to the training is a pre and post survey in regards to cultural competence or mindset and bias. And so everyone who goes through the training must take the pre-survey first, and we were able to kind of assist in creating what that demographics looks like and some of the questions. And then they'll do a post-survey, and then Ohio State University will create a report for each building about the cultural mindset and bias, where people have, to see how people have grown through the process of taking this particular training. And so we'll have access to all that data as well through our work.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Cynthia. Any other? Yes.
Yeah, so real quick to Cynthia, just an observation. Cynthia, the programs that you have supported and developed over the past couple of years really have empowered and helped students be seen. And I think the district has highlighted them, but I don't think the community was really in a spot to take them in. And I think you need to keep doing what you're doing, because I think people are ready to listen. So thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments at this point for Dr. Kellogg, Ms. DeVries, anyone else? I think I will echo what people are saying. This is a great step, a recalibration. Cynthia, thank you so much for the work that you are doing, imagining, dreaming, and believing. You see what I'm doing there, Cynthia? Okay, thank you. And just excited. And Dr. Kellogg, thank you for the thoroughness of the report. Scott Reeves for jumping in as well. It seems to me we have a core of adults that want to do this and want to do this well. And any way that we can support them, and Ms. Marshall, I'm looking at you as well. There's a whole financial piece to this, and I know that you're passionate about that as well. So thank you for everyone, what they are doing. Okay, we shall move on. Thank you all very much. Move on to agenda item 6.02. We are going to get a report regarding the second semester for the Westerville Virtual Academy. And I believe, Mr. Reeves, you are going to share with us?
I am. Thank you, Dr. Kellogg, President Villado, and members of the board. I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you and the community and walk through our process that our team here has developed and the timeline for families who wish to transition either into the Westerville Virtual Academy or the WVA, or out of the WVA beginning with the second semester. So, Mrs. Beck. You can go to the second slide. If you want, I can verbally walk you through maybe, and then once Jill is able to get it pulled up, if we need to backtrack, or I can wait on the visual.
Why don't you go ahead and just kind of intro, give us some quick background while Jill's trying to pull that up. Scott, is that okay?
That's great.
Yep.
So when we developed this option, and if you recall, one of the things that the state allowed districts across the state of Ohio to do is to designate whether we were going to do a blended and or virtual model, which we have a 1-year ability to do. Of course, we submitted to the state the fact that we would do a blended model, and we would be creating an online model. We did that earlier to start the school year. What our team developed was the virtual academy from K-12, and we had approximately 3,800 students from our district opt to go into the virtual academy, and for whatever reason, they may not have felt comfortable coming or exposing their child under the pandemic situation and exposing their child into the building. And then, unlike what we planned, our region spiked a little bit in the summer, so we started off the first month or so completely virtual, and have just now, I think, are into our third week going into the blended model. And so we have had some information from families, both wanting to go into the WVA and families wanting to come out. And one of the things that was important to the board when we started this was that it was not a one-year commitment to stay in the WVA, but families have the opportunity to transition out. And so I think we're up and ready. And so the first part of it is the communication, and we're doing that tonight. And that's the board meeting where we're sharing with the board and our community what our process and timeline is. And so the community, the communication will cascade out through our staff, through our administrative team, and through our families throughout the remainder of this week. So tomorrow, Dr. Kellogg will send out a summary message to our administrative team, to our teaching staff, and to our families, giving a very high-level summary of what I am presenting to you tonight, and to inform our community and our staff to keep their eye out on things that are coming. What are those things coming? On Friday, we are preparing a detailed information that will be sent out to our staff and to all of our community, our parents, kind of specifically saying, this is the process and this is what you will need to do if your family is interested in changing school models for your student. And so the last communication piece, obviously, after all of that gets done, at least by winter break, some buildings may be able to do that a little sooner. We will notify parents of their second semester schedule. In the case of elementary school, their second semester teacher, their cohort assignment, whether they're going to be cohort A, cohort B, so that they can match their family up with the calendar if we're still in the blended model, and any applicable school transportation if that needs to be. And if you take school transportation, you obviously need to know what's your bus stop, where, and when. And so those are the communication pieces that we are going to roll out to families. Jill, if you continue on. So the parents' notification to school and the communications will lead up to Monday morning, a week from today. And on Monday morning, all parents in our district will be sent information from the district. It will come through School Messenger with a link for parents to go to PowerSchool and log into their parent portal with exact directions on go here, click this, and then there will be choices for parents to say whether they are in the WVA and want to go into the building, or if they're in the building, in one of the models that we've laid out for the board earlier, that they may want to go into the WVA. So it goes both ways. This is not just for WVA parents going out. It applies both to parents who want to come in and those who want to go out. And so we will send that information out Monday and give detailed information on that Friday. Jill. And so that window will open on Monday, the 19th, and it will run through Friday, November 6th. So it's a 3-week window, and it'll close midnight Friday, November 6th, and it's a 3-week window for parents to notify the schools through their PowerSchool parent portal that they want to change a model. And I want to make sure that this is clear to our families, and we'll lay this out in the communication, that the buildings will give a confirmation of receipt, because we don't want parents to complete it and then sit back for weeks and weeks and weeks and wonder, well, did they get it? Did they not get it? And so the buildings after November 6th will send a confirmation that they received the indication from parents that they want to switch. It's not a request, meaning the parents are going to submit the indication and then wait to hear back from the buildings to say, is this approved or is this not approved? If the parents submit that they want to change, then we will make that accommodation. So that is a given on the front end. But buildings after November 6th, and when they have the list of all of their students, will notify parents something very simply to say, we want you to know that we received your request for a change of school model, and we will be following up with more information in the coming days and weeks.
Hey, Scott,
Yes,
just real quickly, the submission by the parents is not considered a request, but a notification. I want my child to move from A to B or B to A. And I probably shouldn't use those letters because that's a blended letter, should I? Okay. So you know what I'm saying. The only thing is, just real quickly, when the schools write back, they should avoid the word request. We have received your request. It's not a request, right?
Correct.
We have received your word that your student, John, is moving from WVA to the blended model. Thank you very much. You'll get more information, right?
Correct. Because we don't want parents to think that there's a criteria of, well, what criteria do I have to meet to be approved?
Right.
So they just need to notify us. We want a different model for our student.
Right. Thanks, Scott.
Okay, Joe, you can turn. So after we have that, and we send that confirmation, students moving from the WVA to the blended model, at the secondary level, and this is secondary specific, our students this spring, as they do annually, submit course request sheets. These are the courses that I would like to take in the spring for this coming school year. That is still loaded within PowerSchool. Buildings still have that for all of the WVA students. So students coming in, the counselors will then look at the courses that they requested, and they will try to, based on staffing and class availability, plug as much as they can of the students' request that they're able to do. At the high school level, there was a far greater parallel from what we offer in our building to what is offered in WVA. At the middle school, that was true mostly for the core, not so much from the electives. But as you know, in the middle school, many of the electives are pre-prescribed for them unless they are wanting to choose to take music. And there are more choices now because the board has approved several courses in the last year that the 8th graders have to choose. So we have all of that we can plug in for them. If the student did not submit a course request sheet or is new to Westerville this year, and we don't have that information on file, the buildings will submit that to the parents with instructions on how to return that to them so that they have the information to make a proper schedule for the student in the second semester. The grades that students in the WVA or the markings that they had at the elementary level will come with them. Semester courses, our semester ends December 18th. They will end at that point. We will transcribe them on the transcript for high school or record them as we would in middle, move on as we do in elementary. But grades at the secondary level, middle and high school, for full year courses will just follow them, just as if they moved from an outside district. What we would do if they moved from Cleveland, they moved from California. We would take the grades that they earned that point, marry them with the grades that they would earn in the classroom to determine a final grade. That will happen in this instance as well. Students moving from the building format into the WVA, we have students that are, it's kind of a trickle. We probably have 2 or 3 students that do that every week. Buildings have a process for that, and the building school counselor will sit down with the student and the family, virtually sit down, and help them craft what their WVA schedule will be in the second semester. Go for it, Jill. So for some buildings, especially at the elementary level where they're notifying you, here's your teacher for the second semester. At the middle and high school level, there's some twisting and turning of the master schedules that they're going to need to do to prepare for those students. But either by the 18th or at some point over winter break, the buildings will notify parents who are moving out of the WVA into the building model what their second semester schedule will be so that they know what classes they need to attend, what cohort, so they know which week they're coming if we're still in the blended model at that point. And if there's transportation around this for the student, we'll notify all of them those things before the second semester started. Students moving from blended to WVA will receive the necessary information so that when we come back in the first week of January, they're ready to begin in the WVA. Okay, Jill. And so that's, in a nutshell, that's our timeline, that's our process. When we notify and communicate with families, it'll be very high level tomorrow. We'll be very specific on our communication Friday, outlining these dates, outlining these processes, and then as well when we email them Monday morning, the link so that they could go on and have the 3-week window to make their selection, and then the buildings will then engage them at that point.
Very helpful, Scott. Thank you very much. Let me look to my board members for questions, comments, concerns. Who would like to start? Nancy Nestor looks like she's ready to go. Go ahead.
Sure. Scott, as I think about the communication and all that needs to be conveyed, I am thinking that we need to make sure that people understand that the second semester may have significant changes from the first semester. And I'm thinking of families who are currently in and intending to remain in the blended model. As we look at the possibility of students moving from the WVA into blended, and we think about the impact that may have on everything from teaching assignments to schedules to transportation to lunch to all of those things, I want to be sure that we are also thinking about how we communicate to the families who are in blended now and intending to stay in blended, as well as those who are coming back into the buildings, because there are going to be significant changes likely second semester. And so I guess I'm looking for some reassurance more than anything else that we do intend to be very upfront in explaining to our families the changes that may occur and also the reasons for those changes. I think sometimes we get so enmeshed in all of the details that it's easy to not realize that people don't understand why these changes that are likely to occur are going to occur. So as you think about communication, is all that in your thinking as well?
Yes, and you actually, Dr. Nestor Baker, said something that I'm glad you did, because you jarred something that I think I passed over, is that we expect the vast majority of our families to stay in the current model that they're in. WVA parents to stay and keep their student or students in WVA, and those within our buildings to stay there. Those families, and we'll outline that for them on Friday. We'll outline that again specifically on Monday. Those families don't have to do anything. Those families don't have to notify us that I'm in WVA and I want to stay in WVA. I'm in the building, I want to stay. They don't have to do anything. The only families that need to do something are those that would like to change their learning model. With that said, yeah, I mean, we will share with families that there are things that could happen. And at this point, early on, we'd be speculating because we don't know how many may move. If there's a significant amount of movement, the more changes we need to make, and the more those ripple effects could happen. But in sharing with families, and I think Dr. Kellogg and Greg V. Branson there, his communication team, are kind of outlining that here are things that could happen. Your student could have a different teacher in the WVA or in the blended model, even if you're staying put, depending on the amount of movement that we have. And so we want to share that with parents because we don't want them to be surprised if that does happen. And I can say that in multiple conversations that we've had, we want to try to make that as minimal as possible.
I think that's a good point, Dr. Nestor Baker, and we have talked about that in terms of being explicit in the communication, that this movement at the semester break is going to reshuffle the deck. We don't know the magnitude of that. When I mean reshuffle, I mean teacher assignments, actual schedules at the secondary level, what period I have this class now, what teacher I have may change because we're going to be moving kids across and moving teachers, transportation routes, stops, etc. All that's going to change, which is part of the reason for the long runway of time to get this in the right space. But as Greg V. Brantz and Scott and the team looked at what we wanted to communicate to parents, we did put an emphasis on being explicit to everyone. Even if your kid doesn't make a change, doesn't mean they may not see a change in their schedule or teacher assignment, because we are really redoing everything. And the degree to which people make changes this semester will have ripple effects for everybody. So, but we will do our best to minimize those changes and keep people in the same space as possible. But I think it's to be clear to the community and in the communication, that's an expectation that's going to be part of what happens.
Well, and we initially thought of, this goes back not too long ago, although in this COVID year, things, I don't know time frames anymore in this COVID year. But initially, the WVA was, if you sign up, you're in for a year. Now, that's what, but we got push on that and said, no, we don't want to commit to a year, and completely understandable. Okay, let's just do a semester. And Scott and team and all the folks are saying, okay, if you want to change, just let us know. It's not a request. You don't have to, do anything, give anything, say anything, preach anything. Just if you want to change, we're going to let you change. So I guess I just want to say really thanks to the whole team for taking on this assignment. And it is not just a matter of changing class or changing how you are in class or not, but there are transportation issues. There are lunchroom issues. Some of our lunchrooms, to maintain 6 feet, are going to be hard pressed to try and figure that out. But by golly, I haven't used that phrase in a while. By golly, if you feel it is best for your student to change, then we encourage you to do that. And I know that all the teams will work really hard to make it happen. So that's just my way of saying it is a lot of dominoes. There are a lot of dominoes. So thank you for pushing through that and listening to the community. It says, no, we want to change for whatever reason. You don't need to tell us the reason. We're going to kind of honor who you are, what you are. I'm sorry, I jumped in there. Tracy, Jen, question, Trace, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Just quick question here, Scott. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. As far as transportation, you said if. Are we to assume if a child had transportation the previous year and is attending the same school, would they still have transportation, or were you talking about actual seats on a bus room?
No, what I was saying is if transportation is needed, because we got a lot of kids that walk. So for a lot of our kids, they don't need transportation. They don't use our school transportation. If you are within our boundaries that you need school transportation, we will provide that for you.
Okay. And then secondly, you said 3,300 signed up for the WVA. How many do we have in there now? Or 3,800? Do we still?
We had at one point we had a movement of Dr. Kellogg. I know you asked for that data at one point. I'm going to be very, very approximate. We had about 200 that came into the building, about 100 that went into the WVA for a roughly net gain of 100 more in the building in our K-12 system. So over the course of 12 grades, 20-some buildings, it really is the minimal impact. We have just under 2,000 at secondary and about 1,900 at secondary and a little bit less than that at elementary.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Jen, did you have some?
Yeah, so this is just a very specific question that you may not have an answer to, but I'm just wondering, do we know if there are schools or grades at schools that really can't accept any more kids back in the building? Like, are we in a situation where anyone's going to have to be overflowed or anything like that? And if so, what would that notification look like to families? So just wondering what we know about the type of space, or are we just waiting to see the numbers first before we think about those things?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. And those are the scenarios as we prepare and make sure that we're fully prepared to do this process. I think all of our energies at this point are informing parents and supporting them through this process to make sure that we communicated with them effectively so that they know everything that they need to do and how to do it. But behind the scenes, our team, both at the district level and at the building level, are going through a vast array of scenarios, from a lot of kids come, very few kids come from WVA to the buildings. And I know that both the elementary team and the secondary team are working on those scenarios. It's very hard to say until we are able to know really what we're working with. Everything at this point would be hypothetical, and perhaps once we get through November 6th, and now we're past the communication point, now we're in the design point. Maybe at some point between then and winter break, we can probably follow up with the board and the community with the specifics of what we actually know and what we're actually going to be able to do. And I don't know, Barb, I know Barb is on the, Barbara Wallace, my elementary counterpart, is on as well, if she would speak to that from the elementary standpoint.
I think we're in the same boat. We need to wait and see. At this point, everything looks good, but we have no idea how many kids are coming back. So we're just waiting and going to do our best to accommodate everybody's needs.
Great, thank you both.
Thank you, Jen. Reverend Bell, anything for this one? Did you shoot all your questions on the other one? You don't.
So Scott, at the second, for both Barb and Scott, if you could just hit one more time, if you could elaborate a little bit on the ripple effect that could potentially happen with students coming from the WVA back into the buildings, because parents, families that have students who are currently in the blended model may notice a change in pretty much everything could happen. And so could you help us understand why that is?
Barb, if you'd like to maybe start elementary.
I think when you look at some of our common areas, we may have to change some practices, how many children fit in a cafeteria, how we handle recess. As we get the numbers more clearly who's coming, we'll work to make the adjustments we need, but those adjustments could look like to a family a change in when a child has recess, a change in the number of kids in the cafeteria, or the time that they eat lunch. And all of that, there again, is predicated on how many people come back. It's possible that there'll be buildings where that doesn't happen at all. It's a very big guess at this point. I can tell you that we're going to work to make it work, but I can't tell you what that looks like right now.
Yeah, and from the secondary standpoint, kind of the ripple effect of things that will happen is once a building gets a sense of the number of students that they will get back, like I said, you've got multiple grades, multiple classifications of students, whether they are gifted students, special ed student, EL student, a variety of factors. It is a literal Rubik's Cube that happens when kids come back in that you're twisting and turning. And so depending on the number of students coming back, if more students come back into the building from the WVA than go out, and there's a net gain in the building, well then, if it's beyond what can be fit into the current sections, then the buildings may need to expand sections. So if there are 10 sections of English 7 at one of our middle schools, to make numbers easy, and about 50 kids come back, that's 2 sections worth. Well, now we need 12 sections. And one of the things that we did when we moved into the WVA is we were able to keep teachers tied to their home building. And so proportional to the number of students that went into the WVA were teachers from that building that also went into the WVA to educate them Most of our teachers are doing both. They're doing some sections of WVA, some sections of our building blended model currently. And so that will shift as students come back, because now we need more sections. Some sections may need to be expanded, some sections collapse. It really depends on that, and that's kind of the ripple effect of why you may have some students who the teacher they had in the first semester might change for them the second semester, because some jostling had to happen to accommodate the students from the WVA. And then obviously we're very mindful of, and Scott Dorn and his team, and Laura Energinger and her team have been just fantastic in preparing our buildings and making sure that they're spaced and can be accommodated at lunch. And so when we look at things like that, obviously we'll solve any problems that we may arise if we have more kids come than we anticipate. So those are the things that we're looking at, from lunch to transportation to maybe adding or adjusting sections to accommodate the kids coming back. But like I said, knowing that there's a proportional comeback, we hope that the ripple effects we can keep to a minimum, so that the minimum number of students as possible are impacted.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's important for all of us to kind of understand that, at least at the secondary level, what will be happening in the buildings is the buildings are in a situation where they will have to redo the master schedule. And so in so doing, second semester may look different than first semester. It can, not necessarily that it will, but it can. So I'm just trying to, and so that has an effect on transportation. So now we have more students in, so we may need to add additional stops, which has a ripple effect, because your pickup time may have been at one time first semester, but it will be a different time in second semester. So I just want to encourage parents to keep your eyes open for communication from the buildings and from the district for second semester, to make sure that we are aware of what some of those adjustments that need to be made, how they affect us.
I'll tell you, Pastor Bell, that will be true of students who remain in the WVA as well, because once the dust settles and we see how many students are back in the building, how many staff need to be extracted from the WVA back into the building, or sections that need to come back, there could be some adjustments there too, because the teacher that they had in the WVA may now be back in the building. So that will be both true for both models.
I think one of the things we're saying, without saying it too often, is we want to support you, parents and students. We do. If this is a move that you feel like you want to make for whatever reason, then we want to support that. I think we're just saying, without saying it too loudly, there's just a lot of pieces behind the scenes that we need to be aware of, and so we're grateful, Scott, Barb, all of you behind the scenes working on this. If you don't mind, I'm going to turn to Miss Marshall real quickly, because there are implications potentially for financial impact, and it's probably under the category of, well, we don't know until we know. But is there anything you want to share at all from the financial side of this potential shifting?
Yeah, so I thank you, President Velardo. I do think that it's important for our community to understand that any changes and fluctuations always have a financial impact when it comes to this sort of thing. So that is something that we are looking at and planning for as we're talking about switching between, if we have a number of students switching from the virtual academy into the school buildings versus the school buildings going to a virtual academy, and what that might look like. So we are working to plan for that. But yes, between transportation, food services, everything has a financial impact. The complete effect of that, we won't know until we do know where we stand with that. So.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Just sometimes we forget that there are pieces out there that are going to be impacted by this, a lot of our decisions. So I thought, well, okay, let's just take a quick look at that. I know, Ms. Davidson, you have another question or comment?
So one quick question. How and when will staff be notified of roster and schedule changes?
Probably on the same timeline as students. They may know first just because they're in the building and have direct and immediate access. A lot of our buildings, especially at the secondary building, utilize especially their department chairs, department facilitators, to help them in that work. It certainly won't be done in isolation.
Sure.
Dr. Hopkins and Rhonda Gilpin and that whole team will be working together as we determine how it's decided which teachers come from the WVA back into the building. So there's a lot of collaboration that'll happen. So they probably will know first just because of the immediacy of the access that they had. In the perfect world, we'd love for them to know on the way out the door December 18th for winter break. But certainly they need to know before we get back started so that they can prepare. So as soon as we can, we will notify them.
Tracy, thank you for asking that question, because we are giving shout outs and encouragements to people that certainly deserve it, Scott and Barb and all of that. But this is going to impact our staff, teachers, etc. And so we certainly do want to thank them for the flexibility that they've had for, again, this COVID year, and how that has created some struggles for them as well. And thank you to our staff, our teachers, for being as fluid as they certainly have been, and I would say as professional as they've been. If there are any other questions, comments from folks, thank you very much for all that you all are doing. Keep us in the loop. Let us know how things are going. Just keep us apprised of the numbers shifting all over.
Absolutely.
All right, my friend. Thank you. Moving on to item 8.01, financials. We have none this evening. Moving on to agenda item 9, personnel consent agenda 9.01 through 9.11. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hopkins, are you on the line? Are you going to share with us?
Yes, sir. President Velardo, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, I'd like to present for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. Some of the highlights are as follows. We have 4 retirements to bring to your attention on tonight's agenda. The first one is Deborah Hall. Deborah is retiring from her food service worker position at Genoa effective January 1. She has provided Westerville with 12 years of service. Our second classified member, Sandra Jones, she's going to be retiring from her clerk position at Huber Ridge Elementary School effective December 1st, 2020, and she has provided Westerville with 19 years of service to the community. We have 2 licensed staff members, both from Heritage Middle School, who have announced their retirement. Dr. Todd Ebrecht is retiring from his counseling position at Heritage, effective at the end of the school year. He has been with the district for 25 years. And another Heritage Husky, Pamela Olszewski, is retiring from her English teaching position, effective again at the end of the year, and she has provided the district with 28 years of service. So we're certainly thankful to all 4 of these members for their outstanding contributions to our community and to the students of Westerville. We have 8 classified resignations. With respect to employment, there are 19 individuals who are being recommended for employment to a variety of classified positions. We also have 1 new educator and a number of individuals being recommended to various supplemental positions across the district. And finally, we have an MOA with the WEA for prorating winter and spring sports supplemental positions, should it be necessary to do so. Happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Any questions questions or comments at this point? Hearing, Nancy, did you?
I just want to say something about our retirees.
Sure.
I always think that we need to acknowledge our retirees. I was thinking about it. You know, it's commonly said that no one's irreplaceable. That's completely untrue. Positions can be replaced. They can be filled again. But every single person who is here, upon their retirement or when they leave us for whatever reason, can never really be replaced. And I want to say thank you to tonight's people who are on for retirement approvals tonight. Sometimes I want to say no, none of you are allowed to go, but you're not replaceable, and the impact you've made over all these many years will continue. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Sometimes we do go through these a little quickly, and we forget that behind each one of these there is a name and sometimes a story, always a story. And these are important people to us. So just want to acknowledge that. Hearing no other discussion, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Varda?
Yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 10.01, final reading. Policy 1530, evaluation of principals and other administrators. This is a final reading. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Varda?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 10.02, final reading, policy 3124, employment contract. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any discussion, questions? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 10.03, final reading. Policy 6144, investments revised. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes, thank you very much. Final reading, policy 6152, students' fees, fines, and charges. A final reading, so may I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 10.05, final reading, policy 6152.01, waiver of school fees for instructional materials is a final reading. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 10.06, final reading, policy 6233, amenities for participants at meetings and or other occasions. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any question, discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes, thank you very much. Just a reminder to the community listening out there, those were all final readings. So we have gone through them a number of times. The board has certainly read over them and had their questions, concerns addressed. That's why we were able to go them quickly at this time. Agenda item 11, new business 11.01, a first reading, policy 5611, due process rights. This is a first reading, so no motion and a second. Ms. Meisner, are you out there? Are you going to share with us about this?
President Velardo, members of the board, I'm here to present revisions to policy 5611, due process rights. Revisions to this policy provide for the use of the preponderance of evidence, standard of evidence, in determination of student discipline. This standard is consistent with the standard of evidence that has been applied in the non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies in effect. In addition, retention of investigatory records has been added to this policy. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Meisner. Good information. At this point, this is just the first reading, so we're seeing it. Any questions for Ms. Meisner at this point? Hearing none. Thank you, Ms. Meisner. Moving on to 11.02, first reading, policy 8800, religious and patriotic ceremonies and observances, revised. Again, first reading, no motion and a second. Ms. Meisner, what would you like to share?
President Velardo, members of the board, again, revisions to policy 8800, religious, patriotic ceremonies and observations. This is coming to you for revision due to House Bill 164, which necessitates revisions due to the current change in law. House Bill 164 defines religious expression to include prayer, religious gatherings such as prayer groups, distribution of written materials or literature of a religious nature, and any other activity of a religious nature, including wearing symbolic clothing or expression of a religious viewpoint, as long as that expression is not vulgar, obscene, indecent, or offensively lewd. Boards may no longer restrict student exercise of religion to lunch periods or other non-instructional time. Finally, the law declares that a school district may not prohibit a student from engaging in religious expression when completing homework, artwork, or other types of classroom assignment. Rather, the assignments must be graded or scored using ordinary academic standards and shall neither reward nor penalize a student based on the religious content. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Meisner. This is coming out of HB 164, some revisions. Any questions at this point?
I guess I just have a real quick one.
Sure.
Ms. Meisner, so it seems like this is something that we'll have to move some information to staff on. Is that, are you feeling like this is significantly different from where we were before, that there'll need to be a little bit of just training on compliance with this policy?
I think it's just more of a training issue, making sure individuals are aware of what's occurring. I don't see this as being a major change to how we do business.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Great question. Thank you, Ms. Meisner. Any other questions? Hearing none. Moving on to policy, agenda item 11.03, first reading, policy 7300, disposition of real property, personal property, again revised, first reading, no motion or a second. Mr. Dorn, would you like to share with us?
Yes, sir. Good evening, President Velardo, Vice President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Marshall. Tonight you have a revision to policy 7300, disposition of real property, personal property in front of you. This policy has been revised to reflect the change in the status of unused school facilities required by House Bill 166. The legislation reduces the amount of time for lack of use for school operations from 2 years to 1 year. The board shall offer such facilities for lease or sale to community schools or other such agencies specified in the law and this policy. In addition to the noted timeline change, other revisions to this policy are for clarification purposes and to identify some procedural considerations related to the disposition of unused school facilities. However, we do not have any unused school facilities, nor is there a current plan to vacate any at this time or in the near future. This revision reflects the current state law, the state of the law, and should be adopted just to maintain accurate policies. Thus, it is recommended to the board to adopt the changes in policy 7300 as written.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorn. And I would remind the board that we have no unused properties. As a matter of fact, we are trying to build some new properties to expand our footprint for our students. Any questions or concerns for Mr. Dorn at this point?
It's not a concern for Mr. Dorn. I don't like that our capacity to determine what we wish to do with our facilities has been further eroded by state law. The idea that a district has 1 year that it can have properties sit unused for educational purposes is troubling to me. That the legislature should say that's inappropriate. I understand that it is state law, and as such we have to adhere to it, but it seems to me that this is another opportunity for districts to be forced into giving up their property to entities that they may not otherwise have wanted to do so. So I don't like it. I understand that it is law, and as such we will abide by it, and it will become built into our policy, but I think it's important to understand that it whittles away at local control yet again.
Very well said. Any other comments, concerns, questions on that? And we certainly will be looking at this in the future. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Mr. Dorn. Moving on to agenda item 12, recommended action 12.01, settlement agreement. May I have a motion and a second to receive this settlement agreement?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any question or discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Baker? Ms. Zalman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 13.01, public comments. We have made a change, and the board will be reading the public comments, and so if you will be patient, I will pull that up. We have one that we have received, and we will be at. We are trying to mimic our live meetings, and so there will be a timer of 5 minutes, and we'll be looking at this comment in light of our guidance for public comments. So I think, Mr. Hershiser, you are behind the scenes, and you are going to set the 5-minute timer. I will just begin assuming that. This is an email that comes to us from a Mr. Todd Lotz, and the email begins. What does silence mean? That was something that struck me at the end of watching the last board meeting. After hearing multiple comments from unhappy parents, community members over multiple issues, whether it be over how cohort A versus cohort B is structured over winter break, to problems and frustrations over the ongoing issues with the WVA, Westerville Virtual Academy, there has been an ongoing issue which our leadership have continued to fail in. That is being truly honest, apologetic, admit mistakes, which there have been several documented previously, and choosing time and time again to choose ego over humility and humbleness. We have seen it all the way back from when the words, quote, transparent and honest, end quote, be used, yet time and time again be anything but. We have seen leadership choose to announce plans, yet fail to provide that plan after numerous follow-up questions for update, only revealing there was no plan other than the status quo. See September 2nd meeting for more. We have seen leadership state they respond to public requests, complaints, concerns, only to not follow through unless being called out and held accountable to their own words with a simple, quote, is your issue taken care of, end quote, and no attempt to take ownership and responsibility and, quote, passing the buck, end quote, of blame to other departments under them, i.e., that is, mental health team. We have seen the board since at least July, not only fail to hold our superintendent personally responsible, I'm skipping over this sentence because it does not meet our appropriate language toward a particular person. What does silence mean? As we have been taught over the years, that applies here. Silence means an admittance of guilt. That applies to not only our superintendent, but our school board as well. Last meeting proved that with 0 board member comments. What are some examples of not being truthful? First, the plan to go to the hybrid/blended model July 23rd, only to switch 8 days later to remote learning. Why not go to remote learning originally? Only excuses were given and no admittance of wrong on leadership's end. Second, the announced plan to work on getting special needs students in multiple platforms into 100% learning sooner than the general student population. When pressed on multiple occasions for updates, since leadership was being, quote, transparent and honest, end quote, the answer every time was, it will be released when it is ready. When the plan was revealed September 2, all it simply stated was nowhere close to the original comment. Where is the honesty and transparency and admittance of wrong there? Answer, throw your mental health team under the bus. A third example is when there is admittance of failing our students by leadership. When error is admitted, you back it up with taking ownership and personally investigate. Does an investigation take all of 5 minutes? Hardly. What was leadership's response? Give me specific examples and pass the blame to another team, in this case, the mental health team. After providing said specific examples in length to catch leadership not being truthful and not taking ownership, their response was turn blame back on the one holding them accountable to the words that are on video. So what options are there to voice concerns formally? Thank you for that letter, Mr. Lotz. We've reached the 5-minute mark, and I will certainly pass along the rest of your comments to the team for any appropriate response. That is the only public comment that we have submitted this evening, friends. Moving on to board comments.
Mr. Velardo, I believe there was a second one. Mr. Vibrant shared with me there is a second one. Is it in my email? Do you know? I would assume.
Let me check. Thank you. Yes, there is one. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for letting me know. This is from Kathleen Weaver, and I have not read this. So what is the likelihood that students would need to make compromises on their blended schedule if they are coming from WVA? Is there any way to know what kind of compromise might be needed before families decide to move into the blended model? WVA only allows for 5 courses. Will students be allowed to add electives to better fill their schedule as they move to blended learning? And I do acknowledge that these courses would have to work as semester classes, i.e., students may be allowed to join band late, but not engineering class. That is understood. and then the final kind of question, will the schedules of those kids already in blended be in jeopardy of changing because more students could be coming in from WVA? I think we touched on that, but I am okay if Dr. Kellogg or if Mr. Reeves, do you want to take it? Do you need me to read that again? So you got.
I would say before I'll let Scott give more specifics, but first things first. The first place to go if you're concerned about what it's going to look like is school counselor. As Mr. Reeves said, all of the course selection data is already inputted into Power Schools, so school counselors can have a better opportunity to look at that matchup. And I know, Scott, we had talked about how we'll support families through this, so I'll leave it at that, and if there's something more you want to add to that, feel free.
Yeah, I think you hit it. As I shared earlier, we want to be as accommodating as possible. If there's an opportunity for students to take courses and there's the ability for them and there's the ability for us to schedule them, we absolutely want to do that. The limitations that were placed in the WVA were more about the limitations of the curriculum the WVA offered. We've worked hard over the years to build our music program. We certainly want to maintain that for students who want to come in and exercise that. Mrs. Weaver is also right. It would probably be more to the semester electives, but however, a student that took Spanish 1 in the WVA the first semester, absolutely, we are going to make every effort we possibly can to make sure that they're in Spanish 1 the second semester. So we are only limited by what we can fit the student in and what the parent wants for the student, and that's a great conversation with the school counselor.
Who did I hear somebody?
Me, but doesn't that depend on how many kids come back? So I think there's probably still one little piece in there. Would we really be able to give them a good idea? Or maybe you're thinking if there's 2 or 3 kids in a class, then chances are the kid could get in.
So for example, Mrs. Davidson, if you've got, I'll use art. So if you've got an art teacher that's splitting both the WVA at Genoa and the building blended model, and that art teacher is teaching 3 sections of the building and 2 sections worth of art, and you have 25 or 30 kids come over, enough to create another section in the building, well, that would adjust that teacher's WVA and building schedule to be able to accommodate more kids who want art. Now, I will tell you, in a master schedule, and when I say we will do the very best we can, semester electives are spread out over the whole year. So we'll try to put as many as we can in the second semester, but we certainly couldn't put a year's worth of electives in one semester. We don't have the number of periods or staffing to do that. That's a bigger deal at the middle school, I think, than the high school, where there were some comparable electives going on in the WVA. So yes, there will be some limitations, but I think proportionately moving teachers from the WVA into the building, proportional to the number of students that come, give us more flexibility.
Tracy, does that help? Does that clarify, or is you still not quite sure?
What I heard was they will do the best that they can, and I truly believe that. But I do think until we figure out how many kids are coming back and the classes that are wanted, it's going to be really hard to answer that question. So.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good question, though. And Dr. Keller, I do like you. So if somebody wants to come back, somebody WVA blended, and they want to come back, maybe an initial conversation with a school counselor. If my kid's thinking about coming back, and I know they'd like to take this. Does this have some availability right now? And that kind of conversation, right? Although you're just answering it in that moment in time. You're not answering it with the future knowledge of how many kids are coming. I mean, I get that. I really appreciate Miss Weaver. It was Miss Weaver, right? Miss Weaver's question. That's tough, but it feels like we're going to try to make the best accommodations we can. Anything, John, to add to that, Scott?
I think what you're going to see is like a traditional schedule. Core courses are going to be core courses. It's going to be electives and issues like singletons and doubletons that we always face when we're doing master schedule work. So the experience for a parent going into this, it could very much look like when you're going through the scheduling process at the start of a school year and moving in, where we aren't able to accommodate every request that comes in, just like we do every spring through our scheduling process, right? We begin in February, March. People put in requests. We start to build a master schedule. We see conflicts in the schedule. We don't have enough kids to enroll a class. You're going to see some of that. But, you know, as we always try and do, we will work hard to make it work. In particular, the always the mantra of do no harm. You know, we're not going to set a second semester senior up for not graduating because of something in this system. So I'd also remind people that the purpose of the WVA at the get-go was twofold. One, in particular, for families that are very concerned about health conditions, which have not really changed and may not change a whole lot in the near future. And two, for families who are interested in stability over time, that they wouldn't have to have these fluctuations. And so that's still the case. It's still how it serves best in WVA. So yeah, I can't promise that everything's going to be exactly as people want it, but we will, like we always do, work hard to make it as good as possible.
Thanks, John. And thank you, Scott, for that as well. And Mr. Lotz, Ms. Weaver, thank you for your public comments. Thank you. We're able to share those. Moving on, agenda item 14.01, board comments. Anyone have anything that they'd like to share, or is it time, is it time to go home? Okay.
I have a quick.
Oh, see, you do. Sure, go ahead.
Just a quick one. This is just to put something on people's radar, because I'm one of the legislative liaisons. So I want to thank some folks for involving me in a school funding conversation yesterday, and Mr. Bell and Ms. Marshall. And just so that people know who've paid attention, people have heard about the Cupp-Patterson bill. Well, Patterson and now Representative Gary Scheer are co-sponsoring and trying to move a substitute House Bill 305 through. So just putting that on people's radar that that's happening. There's so much going on. It's easy to lose sight of that larger school funding conversation. So, thanks.
And we can never lose sight of the school funding conversation.
Right.
This is a big, Ms. Marshall, how many millions of dollars have we lost lately?
Well, so $11.5 million is a year on the funding formula that we no longer have in place that we continue to lose. And with the reductions that we've seen due to the pandemic is another $5.6 million.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, but $11.5 million is a big spot. Thank you.
Plus vouchers.
Plus, yes. Yes. So thank you, Jen, for reminding us of that. Reverend Bell, you've asked a lot of questions tonight, but would you? I'm teasing. You know, what? Any comments?
Yes, a few things. First, I would like to thank Dr. Kellogg. Thank you. Especially would like to thank Ms. Cynthia DeVise and her team and all of the work that they have been doing and the equity initiatives throughout the district. So I really want to thank you for that work. I would also like to take a moment or take this opportunity to thank all of the staff and the students that participated on October the 1st in the social justice through poetry virtual event that was sponsored by the Leadership Westerville Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Project. So I want to thank all of the staff and students that participated in that. It was an outstanding event, and you did a tremendous job. So thank you. And then just a kind of a public service announcement reminder that we are in the midst of the voting season. So I want to encourage everyone to exercise their right and participate in our democracy, and to let your voice be heard by voting. And the state has also let us know that there is still a need for poll workers. And so as a school district, let families as well as some of our students know. You could be as young as 17 and you can qualify to be a poll worker. So if you are available on November the 3rd, please be sure to vote. And for those of you who can, be a poll worker. So thank you.
Thank you, Vaughn. Just real quickly, reflecting back on the equity discussion we had and all of the work that people are going on behind the scenes. Last week, I was interviewed by one of our teachers who is working on a master's degree, and one of the areas that he's working on is in the area of social emotional wellness for students and what can districts do and so on and so forth. And he and I came to an agreement that I know every board member up here, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall, and everybody behind the scenes would concur, that if our students are not nurtured and cared for and loved, then we can have the best academics on the planet, and it will not make a difference. And so equity is about saying this is where you belong, and then proving this is where you belong. And focusing on the budgetary concerns is saying that it is worth fighting for. So I am really grateful. We are really grateful for all the people behind the scenes tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you for our public comments, and we look forward to continuing the work together. Mr. Bell has something else that he would like to share. Yes, Reverend Bell.
Well, I just wanted to highlight the fact that North High School hosted the first playoff game since 1988 this past week. So go Warriors. You had a great season and represented well. So thank you to all of our student athletes that are still participating. We wish you great success in the playoff season.
Absolutely. The Warrior football team is back. Moving on to agenda item, right, Ms. Altman, Warrior football, right? Okay, just thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 15.01, Westerville City Schools Board of Education will hold hybrid regular meeting 6 p.m. Monday, October 26th, out of the district office here. And may I have a motion and a second to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second.
Hearing any discussion, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Dr. Nextmaker?
Yes.
Ms. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs.
Yes.
Altman? Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
I'm going to use the mallet to make this official. The answer is yes.
8:34.